A girl alone walks through the desert until she finds an abandoned mansion full of secrets. Emily had been walking for hours through the dry Mojave Desert scrubland of the West Texas Badlands, carrying only a worn-out backpack and the determination to find the grandfather who had disappeared 3 years ago after a terrible argument that split the entire family forever. The scorching sun beat down on the back of her neck as she spotted a grand structure in the distance, emerging like a mirage among the sand dunes. It was an old mansion with broken windows and a deteriorated roof, but something didn't seem right when she noticed colorful clothes drying on a makeshift clothesline in the back of the property. Emily hid behind a saguaro cactus when she heard the muffled sound of a radio playing country music coming from inside the building, confirming her suspicions that someone really did live in that seemingly abandoned place. The 13-year-old girl had run away from home in the early morning hours after overhearing Aunt Margaret talking on the phone about selling the last remaining lands from Grandpa William's inheritance. During the call, Margaret mentioned that he had been spotted by a neighbor near the old St. Andrews Ranch, where the family had owned property since the century before last. Emily couldn't sleep after discovering that everyone knew of her grandfather's whereabouts, but no one had tried to look for him or bring him back home. At dawn, she packed her backpack with water, crackers, and the only photo she had of Grandpa William, taken during the last Christmas they spent together before everything fell apart. Back then, he still smiled and told stories about the times when the ranch was prosperous, when they planted cotton and raised cattle on thousands of acres that stretched as far as the eye could see. Emily had always been his closest granddaughter, the only one who really listened to his memories and understood his sadness when he talked about how the drought and family troubles ended up destroying everything he had built over decades. The argument that drove William from home happened after Margaret accused him of stealing money from the sale of a property, claiming the documents had mysteriously vanished and that only he had access to the safe where they were kept. Her grandfather vehemently denied it, but no one believed his version, especially after Margaret's son-in-law, Brandon, presented evidence that seemed to prove the money's disappearance. The whole family turned against William, kicking him out of the house and forbidding any contact with the grandchildren, including Emily, who was only 10 at the time and didn't understand why her hero had become the villain of the story. Now, 3 years later, Emily had grown up enough to question the official version of events. She noticed how Brandon always changed the subject when someone mentioned the exact whereabouts of the money, and how Margaret got nervous every time letters or documents related to the family's properties arrived. Something didn't add up in the story she'd been told, and her grandfather's absence weighed like a stone on her heart every day. As she approached the mansion, Emily noticed the building was at least 100 years old, with its stone and brick walls bravely resisting time and the harsh weather of the Badlands. The windows on the upper floor were boarded up with wood, but some on the ground floor still had their glass intact, just covered by faded curtains that moved slightly with the wind. The architecture was typical of old colonial plantation houses, with a wide porch supported by wooden columns and a stone staircase leading to the main entrance. She circled the building looking for clearer signs of life, when she discovered a small, carefully maintained garden in the back, with flowering saguaro cacti and a vegetable patch where tomatoes, onions, and bell peppers were growing. The aroma of fresh coffee clearly came from the kitchen, mixed with the smell of burning wood in a wood stove. Emily was certain someone was preparing lunch at that very moment, but when she approached the kitchen window, she couldn't see anyone inside. Determined to discover who lived there, she timidly knocked on the back door, but only silence answered her calls. A curtain moved slightly in one of the upstairs windows, and she became absolutely certain she was being watched by invisible eyes that preferred to remain hidden. Emily's heart raced when she realized she might have found exactly what she was looking for, but the person inside clearly didn't want to be disturbed by visitors. "Grandpa William!" she shouted with all the strength of her lungs. "It's me, Emily, your granddaughter. I've come looking for you." The silence that followed seemed to echo across the vastness of the West Texas Badlands, broken only by the sound of the wind through the dry trees and the distant song of a mockingbird. Emily waited a few minutes, but no one answered her call. On the front porch, she found a wooden rocking chair still warm, as if someone had run off upon seeing her arrive, plus fresh footprints in the sand leading to the main door. "Dear listener," If you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The sound of an approaching engine made Emily quickly hide behind a mesquite tree. It was an old dusty car that stopped in front of the mansion, from which three people she immediately recognized, with a mix of relief and apprehension, got out. Margaret stepped out of the driver's seat with a face red with anger, followed by the twin cousins Tyler and Ryan, both in their early 20s, with serious expressions that promised nothing good for the runaway. "Emily!" Margaret yelled, looking all around. "I know you're here. The GPS on your phone shows exactly this location." The girl realized she had made a grave mistake by not turning the device off completely before running away. Margaret was too smart not to use every available resource to track her, especially when it came to preventing her from finding William. Her aunt had always been the most vocal against her grandfather during the whole argument 3 years ago, even going so far as to threaten to call the police if he tried to approach the family again. "You have no idea the danger you're in," Margaret continued, walking toward the house. "William is not right in the head. He could do anything to you." Tyler and Ryan split up to surround the mansion, clearly instructed not to let Emily escape again. They had grown up hearing the same stories about how their grandfather had robbed the family, and they never questioned the official version of events. To them, William was a dangerous man who had broken everyone's trust and deserved to remain isolated for the rest of his life. Emily knew she only had a few minutes before being discovered. She decided to run to the back door she had found ajar during her earlier inspection, managing to slip silently into the house while her aunt and cousins searched the front of the property. The interior of the mansion completely surprised her. Contrary to the deteriorated external appearance, the rooms were clean, organized, and clearly inhabited by someone who cared to keep everything in order. The kitchen had well-kept utensils, a table set for one person, and the wood stove was still warm with a pot of beans slowly cooking. In the old but still working refrigerator, there were photographs held by colorful magnets, and Emily felt her heart stop as she recognized many pictures of herself at different ages. From a baby to recent photos, she had no idea where they had come from. It was as if someone had carefully documented every important moment of her life, even from a distance. The living room held old but well-preserved furniture, with a leather armchair that still bore the imprint of someone who had gotten up quickly. On a side table, there was a still steaming cup of coffee and a newspaper open to the classifieds page, where several job offers were circled with a red pen. Emily realized that whoever lived in that place was trying to re-enter the job market, even at an advanced age. The walls of the room were covered with old family photographs, including many she had never seen before. There were pictures of weddings, baptisms, graduations, and Christmas parties dating back several decades, all carefully framed and arranged chronologically like a visual timeline of family history. In the center of the main wall was an enlarged photo of the last Christmas William spent with the family, where everyone was smiling genuinely, not imagining it would be the last time they would all be together like that. A noise from the upper floor startled Emily, followed by the sound of cautious footsteps walking back and forth. She climbed the wooden stairs that creaked under her feet, trying to make as little noise as possible. The second-floor hallway was long and dark, with several closed doors on both sides. When she tried to open the first one, she found a room completely decorated as if it were hers, with a single bed covered by a pink comforter she recognized as identical to the one she had at home. On the bedroom wall were drawings she had made as a child, all carefully framed and labeled with precise dates. A small desk was filled with old school notebooks, colored pencils, and even some dolls she had lost years ago and never been able to find. On the dresser was a collection of birthday gifts still wrapped, each with a handwritten card, and the date corresponding to her last 3 birthdays. The next room was clearly occupied by an elderly man, with men's clothes hanging in the closet and high blood pressure medication organized on the nightstand. An old Bible was open to the Book of Job, with several passages underlined about suffering and perseverance. In the drawer of the small table she opened out of curiosity, she found a notebook filled with notes about her school schedule, extracurricular activities, and even comments about her grades and behavior, as if someone were tracking every detail of her academic life from afar. Margaret forced her way into the house, shouting Emily's name, followed by the cousins who searched every room on the ground floor with the determination of soldiers on a mission. The aunt was visibly upset by her niece's escape, but also seemed nervous about the possibility of finding William in that house. Her hostility toward her father-in-law was almost palpable, laden with years of resentment and unresolved accusations. "Dad!" Margaret shouted at the ceiling. "I know you're up there. Give me back my niece immediately." Emily quickly hid inside a closet built into the man's room, managing to watch through a crack as her aunt came up the stairs accompanied by her sons. Margaret was more agitated than she had seen in years, with trembling hands and a voice faltering with emotion. It was obvious that situation was affecting her more deeply than she wanted to show, perhaps bringing to the surface memories and feelings she had tried to bury during the 3 years of separation. "Emily, you don't understand," said Margaret, upon entering the room decorated for the girl. "He is not the same man you knew. Living in isolation has made him dangerous." The aunt rummaged through all the gifts and drawings, clearly disturbed to discover the extent of William's obsession with his granddaughter. To her, that was proof of abnormal behavior, an invasion of privacy that confirmed her worst fears about her father-in-law's mental state. Margaret had always been a practical and controlling woman who couldn't understand how someone could maintain such an emotional connection with a family that had rejected him. Tyler found the notebooks with notes about Emily and showed them to his mother, who became even more alarmed upon realizing the level of detail in the information. To the 3 visitors, that seemed more like evidence of sick behavior than a demonstration of love and longing. They couldn't comprehend that William had found in the discreet observation of his granddaughter the only way to maintain some connection with the family he had lost. "Where are you, stubborn girl?" shouted Ryan, opening and closing all the doors in the hallway. Emily remained motionless inside the closet, smelling the familiar scent of the cologne William always wore, impregnated in the clothes around her. It was the same aroma she associated with the Sundays of her childhood, when her grandfather would take her fishing in the pond or to pick fruit in the ranch's backyard. That smell brought back a flood of happy memories she had tried to forget during the years of forced separation. It was then that a deep, familiar voice echoed through the house, coming from the ground floor. "Leave my granddaughter alone." The silence that followed was cutting. Margaret stood paralyzed at the top of the stairs, while her sons exchanged glances, unsure how to react. William's voice carried an authority they didn't expect to hear, very different from the image of a defeated and fragile man they had built in their minds during the years of absence. Emily quickly came out of the closet and ran down the stairs, finding her grandfather standing at the entrance to the living room. At 72, William was thinner and more wrinkled than she remembered, but his eyes still held the same kindness and intelligence that had charmed her throughout her childhood. He wore simple but clean clothes and held an old leather briefcase that seemed to contain important documents. The reunion was emotional but tense. Emily threw herself into her grandfather's arms, feeling finally at home after 3 years of longing. William hugged her with tears in his eyes, whispering words of affection and apologizing for having stayed away for so long. For him, that moment represented the fulfillment of a dream he had nurtured during each day of his voluntary exile. "Grandpa, I knew you hadn't done anything wrong," said Emily, still in her grandfather's arms. "My dear little granddaughter," replied William with a choked voice. "You've grown so much. I followed everything from afar, but being close to you again is so much better than I imagined." Margaret came down the stairs slowly, followed by her sons, who were clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The aunt had an expression of anger mixed with something that seemed like guilt or regret, as if William's physical presence brought to the surface contradictory emotions she preferred to keep buried. "Dad, what have you done with this girl?" asked Margaret with hostility. "How did you manage to bring her here?" "I didn't bring anyone," replied William calmly. "Emily found me on her own. She is braver and more determined than any of you imagine." "That changes nothing," exploded Margaret. "You're still the same thief who stole from our family. Emily is underage and shouldn't be here." Grandpa William clenched his fists, but kept his voice controlled. It was evident that accusations still hurt him deeply, even after 3 years of hearing the same story repeated by the whole family. William had aged not just physically, but emotionally, carrying the weight of a guilt he insisted he didn't deserve. "Margaret, you know I never stole anything from our family," he said sadly. "Everything I built in my life was with you and my grandchildren's future in mind." "Lies!" she shouted. "Brandon proved you took the money from the sale of the ranch. The documents disappeared from the safe, and only you had the combination." Emily watched the argument without fully understanding the details, but sensing there was much more to the story than she'd been told. The intensity of Margaret's anger seemed disproportionate, as if she was trying to convince herself of something she didn't fully believe. The cousins remained quiet, clearly uncomfortable to be in the middle of a family conflict they didn't fully understand. "Where is Brandon now?" asked William provocatively. "Why didn't he come with you if he's so concerned with the family's well-being?" Margaret hesitated for a moment before answering, which didn't go unnoticed by Emily. There was something about her husband's absence that seemed to bother her aunt more than she wanted to admit. The prolonged silence created a tension in the air that everyone could feel. "He's traveling for work," Margaret said finally, without much conviction. "For 3 months?" William replied with irony. "What kind of work takes that long?" The question hit Margaret like a punch to the stomach. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide, but it was obvious her husband was a sensitive subject she didn't want to discuss in front of the children. Emily realized there were family problems that went far beyond the dispute with her grandfather, secrets that were being carefully guarded to maintain an appearance of normality. William observed his daughter-in-law's reaction, and his expression softened slightly, as if he knew something the others didn't. The leather briefcase in his hands seemed to contain answers to questions no one dared to ask. He looked at Emily with tenderness, but also with a sadness that suggested some truths were too heavy to share. "Emily," William said softly, "there are things you need to know about our family, things that have been hidden from you all these years." "No," Margaret interrupted desperately. "She's too young to understand adult matters. We're leaving right now." "No, Aunt," said Emily firmly. "I'm not a child anymore. I have a right to know the truth." Tyler and Ryan moved toward their cousin as if to force her to leave the house, but William stepped between them and the girl. Even though he was older and physically smaller than the young men, his presence radiated an authority that made them hesitate. There was something in her grandfather's eyes that suggested he was willing to defend his granddaughter at any cost. "You will not touch her," William said in a firm voice. "Emily came here on her own because she knows something isn't right with the story you've told." "You're delusional," shouted Margaret. "I won't let you manipulate my niece with your lies." "Lies?" William opened the leather briefcase and took out some documents. "Then let's talk about lies, Margaret. Let's talk about who really stole from this family." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret visibly paled, while her sons looked at her without understanding what was happening. Emily felt her heart race as she realized she would finally discover the truth about what had destroyed her family 3 years ago. William handed an official document to Margaret, who recoiled as if seeing a poisonous snake. It was a bank statement showing transfers of large sums of money to an account in Brandon's name, made exactly on the days when the money from the sale of the ranch had supposedly disappeared. "Do you recognize these transfers?" asked William calmly. "They were made with forged documents using my signature. Brandon spent months planning how to take the family's money without being discovered." This can't be true," stammered Margaret, taking the paper with trembling hands. "It is true," continued William, pulling more documents from the folder. "Here are copies of the forged signatures, the bank report confirming the fraud, and even flight records showing that Brandon left the country 2 days after the money was transferred." Margaret collapsed into a chair, reading the documents in disbelief. Her entire life had been built on a lie, and now the truth was before her eyes, irrefutable. She had spent 3 years hating her father-in-law and defending a husband who had betrayed and abandoned her in the worst possible way. Why didn't you ever show this before?" she asked in a broken voice. "Because you wouldn't listen," William replied sadly. "The day Brandon accused me, I tried to explain something was wrong, but you had already decided I was guilty. No one wanted to see the evidence I had gathered." Tyler and Ryan read the documents over their mother's shoulder, gradually understanding they had spent years blaming the wrong person. The revelation was devastating for them, as they had always seen Brandon as a father figure and respected his word above their own grandfather's. "Mom," said Tyler weakly, "does this mean Grandpa was right all along?" Margaret couldn't answer, only crying silently as the magnitude of her mistake became clear. She had destroyed the family's relationship with William, deprived Emily of time with her grandfather, and lived 3 years in a lie built by a man she had loved and trusted completely. Emily was in shock, trying to process all the information. Her perception of the world had been completely altered in a matter of minutes. The grandfather she had always known to be a good and honest man truly was innocent. But that meant her entire family had made a terrible mistake that cost them precious years of togetherness and happiness. "Brandon came to me weeks before the sale of the ranch," explained William, sitting next to Emily. "He knew I kept all the important documents in the safe and insisted on knowing the combination, claiming he wanted to help organize the family papers." "And you gave it to him?" asked Margaret between sobs. "Of course I did," replied William. "He was my son-in-law, the father of my grandchildren. I trusted him as I would trust a son." The irony of the situation was cruel. William had been betrayed precisely by trusting too much in someone he considered family, and then was punished by the very family he tried to protect. His generosity and good faith had been used against him in the cruelest way possible. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "When I realized the money was gone, I started investigating on my own," continued William. "It took me months to gather this evidence, but by the time I finally had it, Brandon had already kicked me out of the house and convinced you all that I was guilty." "But why did he do it?" asked Emily, still trying to understand the motivation behind the betrayal. "Gambling debts," William replied sadly. "Brandon had vices you didn't know about. He owed a lot of money to dangerous people and needed a large sum quickly. Our family's money was the easiest solution he found." Margaret sobbed uncontrollably, realizing she had been married for years to a man she never truly knew. All her certainties about marriage, family, and the future had crumbled in a matter of minutes. She had defended a liar and attacked an innocent man, causing unnecessary pain and separation for people she loved. "Dad, I don't know what to say," murmured Margaret. "I destroyed everything because of a terrible mistake." "You were deceived," said William generously. "Brandon was very convincing, and the evidence he planted really seemed real. I don't blame you for believing him." "But I should have trusted you," Margaret burst out. "You built our family with love and dedication for decades. How could I believe you were capable of stealing from us?" The question hung in the air like a lament echoing through the quiet house. Margaret was confronting not only the truth about Brandon, but also her own capacity for judgment and family loyalty. She had chosen to believe a stranger instead of trusting the man who had welcomed her as a daughter when she married his son. Tyler and Ryan seemed lost, unsure how to process the information that they had spent 3 years hating their grandfather for a crime he never committed. They had been deprived of a relationship with William during some of the most formative years of their lives, missing advice, stories, and moments of affection that could never be recovered. "Grandpa," Tyler said hesitantly, We're sorry, we didn't know." "You were young," William interrupted kindly. "You did what you thought was right at the time. What matters is that we now know the truth and can try to rebuild our family." Emily watched the interaction between the family members with a mix of relief and sadness. On one hand, she was happy to discover that her grandfather was truly innocent and that her intuition about his character was correct. On the other hand, she felt angry for having lost 3 precious years with him because of Brandon's lie. "Where is Brandon now?" asked Emily. "We don't know," admitted Margaret. "He said he was going on a business trip 3 months ago, but he never got back in touch. His phone doesn't work and no one knows where he is." William exchanged a meaningful look with Emily, as if he knew more about Brandon's whereabouts than he was revealing at the moment. The leather folder still contained documents he hadn't shown, suggesting there were more revelations to come. "Margaret," William said carefully, "have you been checking the family bank accounts recently?" "What do you mean?" she asked with apprehension. "Just a suggestion," he replied diplomatically. "Perhaps it would be prudent to take a look at the statements from the last few months." Margaret's blood ran cold as she understood the implication of her father-in-law's words. If Brandon had stolen from the family 3 years ago, there was no guarantee he hadn't done the same again before disappearing. She picked up her phone with trembling hands and began to access the banking app. What she found confirmed her worst fears. The joint account she maintained with Brandon had been completely emptied the week before his disappearance. Over $50,000 had been withdrawn in a single transaction, leaving only a few cents as a balance. Margaret had been robbed again by the same man, but this time he had taken care to flee before the betrayal was discovered. "He took everything," she whispered, showing the bank statement to her children. "Our money, our savings, everything." The revelation created a heavy silence in the room. Tyler and Ryan stared at the phone screen in disbelief, processing the fact that the man they had considered a father figure had stolen not only from their grandfather, but from the entire family. Brandon had methodically planned to destroy the financial lives of people who trusted him, including his own stepchildren. "That's why he insisted so much on you continuing to blame me," said William sadly. "As long as I was the villain of the story, no one would suspect him. He needed to keep you focused on your anger toward me, so he could keep stealing without being discovered." Brandon's strategy had been diabolically efficient. By creating a scapegoat in William, he had ensured the family directed all their suspicion and vigilance toward the wrong person, leaving him free to continue his criminal activities. The family division he had orchestrated also ensured William had no access to the information needed to expose the truth before it was too late. "How could we have been so naive?" asked Ryan, running his hands through his hair. "You trusted someone who should have been trustworthy," replied William. "Brandon was a family man, had worked honestly for years. There was no reason to suspect him. Men like him are experts at deceiving good people." Margaret was devastated by the understanding that she had been married for years to a criminal she never knew. All her memories of their marriage were now tainted by doubt about what had been real and what had been manipulation. She questioned every tender gesture, every word of love, every moment of happiness she had shared with Brandon. "Dad," she said with a broken voice, "how can you forgive us after everything we did?" "Because you are my family," William replied simply. "The love I feel for you hasn't changed, even during the worst moments. I always knew the truth would come out one day." Emily stood up and hugged her grandfather tightly, feeling a mix of relief, gratitude, and regret for the lost time. She had found not only William, but also confirmation that her intuition about his character had always been correct. The man who had taught her to fish, told her stories, and shown her unconditional love was exactly the person she remembered. "Grandpa, you've lived here alone all these years?" she asked. "It wasn't so bad," William lied, trying not to worry her. "This house has many good memories. It belonged to your great-grandmother, my mother. She always said that when we felt lost in life, we should come back home." The truth was that the 3 years of isolation had been the hardest of William's life. He had faced loneliness, depression, and even moments when he questioned if it was worth continuing to fight. Only his love for his granddaughter and the hope of one day reconciling with his family had kept him strong during the darkest moments. "But how did you manage to live here without anyone knowing?" asked Tyler. "St. Andrew's Ranch has always been ours," explained William. "This house had been abandoned for decades, but it's still registered in my name. I just fixed it up little by little and made it livable again." The old house truly had a rich history dating back to the 19th century, when the family had prospered from cotton farming and cattle ranching. The thick stone and brick walls had withstood decades of storms, droughts, and abandonment, but still maintained the solidity needed to shelter someone in need of a refuge. William showed the family the improvements he had made over the 3 years. He had installed solar power, drilled an artesian well, repaired the roof, and created a rainwater harvesting system. The manual labor had been therapeutic for him, a way to channel his frustration and sadness into something productive and useful. "You did all this by yourself?" asked Emily, impressed by the extent of the renovations. "I had help from some neighbors when needed," replied William. "The folks around here are good. They don't ask too many questions and help when you need it. They knew I was going through family difficulties." The rural community had welcomed William without judgment, offering sporadic work, occasional companionship, and the respect he deserved as an elderly man facing adversity. To them, it didn't matter what problems he had faced with his family. What counted was his character, his willingness to help his neighbors, and his ability to start over even at an advanced age. Margaret explored the house with a mix of admiration and guilt, realizing how much effort and love William had invested in creating a home for himself after being expelled from family life. Every room showed signs of care and attention to detail, proving that he had not given in to bitterness but chosen to rebuild his life with dignity. "Dad, this house is beautiful," she said with tears in her eyes. "You've created a real home here." "It was my way of keeping busy," replied William. "When we feel rejected, sometimes the only thing we can do is create something beautiful and hope that one day someone we love will come to see what we've built." William's words deeply touched everyone present. He had transformed his pain into something constructive, using the time of forced isolation to restore not only a house, but also his own dignity and sense of purpose. The house was a metaphor for his resilience and unshakable hope in the possibility of family reconciliation. Emily discovered that the room decorated for her had not been created out of obsession, but out of love and hope. William had kept alive the possibility that one day she would come to visit him, preparing a space where she would feel welcome and loved. Each stored gift represented a lost birthday, but also the faith that there would be future birthdays to be celebrated together. "Grandpa, how did you get these pictures of me?" asked Emily, pointing to the images on the refrigerator. William looked a little embarrassed before answering. I sometimes went to town and watched from a distance as you left school or played in the square. I took a few pictures when I could, just to ease the longing." The revelation was touching and sad at the same time. William had become a kind of invisible spectator of his granddaughter's life, following her growth through furtive and distant observations. He had risked being misunderstood, or even considered a dangerous stranger, all to maintain some connection with the girl he loved. "You never tried to talk to me?" asked Emily. "I often wanted to," admitted William. "But I was afraid of causing problems for you at home. Margaret had made it clear that any contact with me would be harmful to the family." "Dad, I was wrong," said Margaret, finally managing to formulate a proper apology. "You didn't deserve to be treated that way. We didn't deserve to have a father and grandfather as good as you." "The past is past," said William generously. "What matters is that now we can start over and build something new together." Tyler and Ryan timidly approached their grandfather, offering to help improve the house even further and promising to visit him regularly. They were genuinely remorseful for having lost years of togetherness by believing lies, and they wanted to make up for the lost time through concrete actions. "Grandpa, we can help plant more things in the yard," offered Ryan. "Tyler understands irrigation and I like gardening. And I can come here every weekend," added Emily enthusiastically. "We can fish in the pond, and you can teach me to cook on the wood stove." William smiled for the first time since the family had arrived, seeing that perhaps it really was possible to rebuild the bonds that Brandon had destroyed. The house in the West Texas Badlands, which had been his refuge in solitude, could become a meeting point to gather the scattered family once again. "But before planning the future," said William, picking up the leather folder again, "we need to settle an important matter about Brandon." "What do you mean?" asked Margaret, still wiping away tears. "He hasn't finished robbing our family yet," replied William gravely. "The documents I have here show he forged more signatures recently. There are properties that were transferred into his name without your knowledge." The revelation fell like a bomb on the gathered family. As if stealing money on 2 different occasions wasn't enough, Brandon had also illegally taken possession of lands and properties that had belonged to the family for generations. His greed had been even greater than anyone had imagined. William showed documents proving the fraudulent transfer of 3 rural properties, including the old main house of the ranch where the family had lived for decades. Brandon had forged Margaret's signatures and used false documents to register the properties in his name, creating a passive income stream through leases he secretly collected. "Does that mean he's been making money off our land for years?" asked Tyler, incredulous. "Exactly," confirmed William. "The tenants were paying him, believing he was the legitimate owner. Brandon managed to create a side income using properties that weren't his." Margaret was beyond indignation. Discovering she had been robbed and betrayed in so many different ways by someone she had trusted completely was devastating. Brandon hadn't just taken money, he had systematically plundered the entire family inheritance, using his position of trust to commit increasingly elaborate crimes. "How did he manage to forge my signature so well?" she asked. "Practice," replied William sadly. He was probably preparing this scheme for years, studying signatures and creating opportunities to commit fraud without being detected. The family realized that Brandon had been a calculating criminal who had infiltrated their lives with the specific goal of stealing everything he could. His recent flight hadn't been motivated by work problems, but by the need to disappear before his criminal activities were discovered. "Dad, what can we do to get our properties back?" asked Margaret. "I've already filed a legal action contesting the fraudulent transfers," replied William, showing more documents. "With the evidence I've collected, we have a very good chance of recovering everything that was stolen." William had spent his 3 years of isolation not just renovating the house, but also meticulously investigating all of Brandon's fraudulent activities. He had hired a lawyer with his few resources and built a solid case that could return to the family everything that had been stolen illegally. "You did all this for us, even after how we treated you?" asked Margaret, moved. "You are my family," repeated William. "I couldn't let Brandon completely destroy what I spent a lifetime building. Even if you never forgave me, I wanted to make sure you got back what was rightfully yours." William's generosity and unconditional love contrasted drastically with Brandon's selfishness and cruelty. While the son-in-law had used his position in the family to steal and destroy, the father-in-law had used his freedom in exile to protect and rebuild, even with no guarantee he would be forgiven or accepted again. Emily hugged her grandfather tightly, understanding for the first time the magnitude of the sacrifice he had made for the family. For 3 years, William had faced loneliness, humiliation, and financial hardship, but he had never stopped fighting for the rights of the people he loved, even when those people had rejected him. "Grandpa, you are the kindest man in the world," she said through tears. "I'm not perfect, my little granddaughter," replied William. "But I've learned that when we truly love someone, we keep caring for that person even when they can't care for us." The lesson was profound and touched everyone present. Tyler and Ryan realized they had had before them an extraordinary example of unconditional love and dignity in the face of adversity, but they had been too blind to recognize those qualities. Margaret understood she had traded a man of exceptional character for a charming criminal who had destroyed her life. "Dad, how can we make up for everything you suffered for our sake?" asked Margaret. "You don't need to make it up to me," said William. "We just need to move forward as a family and make sure something like this never happens to us again." "But what about Brandon?" asked Emily. "He'll keep stealing from other families if he isn't stopped." "The authorities have already been notified," William informed them. "When they try to use the forged documents or access the fraudulent accounts, he will be arrested. Men like Brandon eventually make mistakes that bring them to justice." The prospect that Brandon would face consequences for his crimes brought some satisfaction to the family, but the emotional damage he had caused would still take time to heal. Margaret would have to rebuild her life as a single woman. Tyler and Ryan would need to process the loss of the father figure they had trusted, and everyone would have to learn to trust again after such a deep betrayal. "What's important now is that we are together again," said William, looking at each family member. "Brandon managed to separate us for a while, but he couldn't destroy the love we feel for each other." The family reunion at the house in the Badlands marked the beginning of a new phase for all of them. Margaret decided to move temporarily to the property to help William with the improvements and to rebuild the relationship that had been lost. Tyler and Ryan would spend weekends at the ranch, learning about the family history and helping with the manual work that still needed to be done. Emily was radiant at the prospect of finally being able to spend time freely with the grandfather she had always loved. She planned to spend all her school vacations at the ranch, learning the rural skills William could teach and hearing the family stories she had missed during the years of separation. "Grandpa, can you teach me to plant?" she asked excitedly. "Of course, my little granddaughter," William replied with a smile. "We'll start with a vegetable patch and then we can plant some fruit trees. This land is good, it just needed someone to care for it, with affection." The metaphor was perfect for the family situation. Like the land, the family relationships had been neglected and nearly lost, but with care, patience, and love, they could bloom again and produce sweet fruit. William had kept alive the hope that one day this would be possible, and now he finally saw his dreams coming true. Margaret realized she would need time to fully process Brandon's betrayal and rebuild her self-esteem as an independent woman. The house in the West Texas Badlands offered the perfect environment for this healing, far from the pressures of the city and surrounded by the unconditional love of a family she had almost lost due to an error in judgment. "Dad, I want to learn to live more simply," she said. "Brandon made me believe I needed luxuries and status to be happy, but I've discovered that what really matters is having people who truly love us." "The simple life has its pleasures," agreed William. "When we wake up hearing birds singing, when we eat food we've planted ourselves, when we watch the sunset in peace. These things are worth more than any money." Tyler and Ryan were eager to learn about the family history and understand their rural roots. For years, Brandon had influenced them to look down on country life, considering it backward and without a future. Now they realized they had missed the opportunity to connect with their origins and develop valuable skills that could be useful throughout their lives. "Grandpa, what was the ranch like when you were young?" asked Tyler. "It was a different world," William replied nostalgically. "We had hundreds of head of cattle, crops that stretched to the horizon, employees who had worked with us for generations. It was a community, a big family where everyone looked out for each other." William told stories about the ranch's golden years, when the family was prosperous and respected throughout the region. He described Christmas festivals that lasted whole days, harvest gatherings where neighbors helped each other, and the feeling of pride he felt seeing the work of his hands feeding families in various towns. "What happened to all that?" asked Emily. "Life changed," William explained philosophically. "There were droughts, changes in the economy. The young people left for the city in search of opportunities. It was no one's fault, just the circumstances of the time." "But now we can start over," said Margaret with renewed hope. "Maybe not on the same scale as before, but we can create something new and sustainable." The idea of rebuilding the family ranch as a joint project excited everyone present. It wouldn't be an attempt to recreate the past, but rather to build a future that honored family tradition while embracing the possibilities of the present. William had knowledge and experience, Margaret had determination and renewed energy, and the young people had strength and willingness to learn. "We could create a model ranch," suggested Ryan, "use modern irrigation techniques and sustainable agriculture to maximize production, even with less rain. And host visitors interested in rural tourism," added Tyler. "A lot of city people want authentic country experiences." Emily imagined the ranch full of life again, with animals grazing, green gardens, and the big house serving as the center of a welcoming community. She wanted to be part of every aspect of this rebirth, learning as much as possible from her grandfather before it was too late. "Grandpa, do you think we can achieve all this?" she asked. "Absolutely," William replied with confidence. "When a family is united and works toward the same goal, no dream is too big to be realized." The grandfather's words sealed a tacit pact among all present. They had rediscovered the value of family, land, and honest work. Brandon had tried to destroy all this out of greed and selfishness, but inadvertently, he had created an opportunity for the family to strengthen and grow in ways he had never imagined. Margaret looked around the house that William had restored with so much love and had a clear vision of what she needed to do. She would sell her house in the city, use the money to invest in the ranch, and move permanently to the Badlands. It was time to prioritize relationships over possessions, experiences over appearances. "Dad, "I want to live here with you," she announced. "I want to help rebuild our family and our land." "It would be an honor to have you here," replied William, moved. "This house has always been too big for just one person." Tyler and Ryan decided they would spend at least half their time at the ranch, learning agriculture and developing businesses that could be operated remotely. The digital age made it possible to work from anywhere, and they were eager to escape the stress and competitiveness of urban life. Emily was already planning to switch schools to study in the town nearest the ranch, where she could maintain her formal education while learning practical skills from the family. She wanted to grow up connected to her roots, understanding where she came from, and having a solid foundation of family values to guide her through life. The sun began to set over the Badlands, painting the sky with orange hues that reflected on the stone facade of the restored mansion. The family gathered on the porch to watch the natural spectacle, each silently processing the dramatic transformations that had occurred that day. "You know," said William, contemplating the horizon, "during the 3 years I spent alone here, I watched the sunset every day and imagined how wonderful it would be to share this view with you all again." "And now we're here," said Emily, holding her grandfather's hand. "Now we're here," repeated William gratefully. "And this time, no one will be able to separate us." As darkness gradually took over the landscape, lights began to turn on inside the house, creating a cozy atmosphere that contrasted with the apparent abandonment the mansion had shown that morning. The transformation of the property mirrored the family's transformation. Both had seemed lost and hopeless, but with love and dedication, they had found new life. Margaret prepared dinner using the ingredients William had grown in his garden, creating a simple but nutritious meal they shared around the kitchen table. It was the first time in 3 years the family had gathered for a meal, and everyone savored not just the food, but also the feeling of belonging and connection they had lost. "This food is delicious, Grandpa," commented Tyler. "You learned to cook very well." "Necessity teaches many things," replied William modestly. "When we live alone, we either learn to fend for ourselves or go hungry." "Well, from now on you won't have to fend for yourself ever again," promised Margaret. After dinner, the family settled in the living room to talk about plans for the future and share memories of the past. William showed old photo albums that documented the history of the ranch and the family through several generations, creating a bridge between the glorious past and the promising future they were building together. "Look at this photo," said William, pointing to a black and white image. "That's my father with the ranch's first cotton harvest in 1952. He was so proud he had this picture taken to send to relatives living in the capital." The photos told a story of hard work, prosperity, challenges, and resilience that had marked the family for decades. Emily watched, fascinated by the images of great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents she had never known, but who shared physical traits and familiar expressions with the people around her. "Grandpa, do I look like her?" asked Emily, pointing to a young woman in a 1960s wedding photo. "Very much," replied William tenderly. "That's your great-grandmother Hope when she married my father. She was exactly your age in that picture, and her eyes sparkled just like yours." The connection to past generations gave Emily a sense of continuity and purpose she had never experienced before. She wasn't just a teenager trying to find her place in the world. She was part of a lineage of strong, hard-working people who had faced challenges and built something lasting in the West Texas Badlands. Tyler and Ryan were impressed to discover that their ancestors had been pioneers in agricultural and livestock techniques in the region, innovating irrigation and animal husbandry methods that were adopted by ranchers throughout the area. The family had a legacy of knowledge and experience that could be extremely valuable in rebuilding the property. "Why did we never know these stories?" asked Ryan. "Brandon didn't like it when I talked about the past," admitted Margaret. "He said it was old folks' stuff and that we needed to focus on the future. Now I realize he wanted to disconnect us from our roots to have more control over us." Brandon's strategy had been more subtle and destructive than anyone had realized. By devaluing family history and discouraging conversations about the past, he had systematically weakened the bonds that held the family together, making it easier to manipulate them when the time came to execute his financial schemes. "Men like Brandon are experts at isolating their victims," explained William. "They know that people disconnected from their roots and families are more vulnerable to manipulation and abuse. The night wore on with conversations that ranged from nostalgic to hopeful, sad to joyful, as the family collectively processed the traumatic events of the past and planned for a brighter future. The house that had witnessed decades of family history was once again fulfilling its purpose as a center of unity and love. Emily was the first to notice she was tired, but she didn't want to go to sleep and miss a single minute of the family reunion she had dreamed of for 3 years. William noticed her struggle against sleep and suggested they all rest, promising they would have many more days to talk and plan together. "Grandpa, do you promise that when I wake up tomorrow, all this won't have been a dream?" asked Emily sleepily. "I promise, my little granddaughter," replied William, kissing her forehead. "Tomorrow we'll wake up as a reunited family, and every day after that too." Margaret helped Emily settle into the room William had prepared for her, moved to see the stored gifts and framed drawings that demonstrated her grandfather's constant love. She realized that, while she had been focused on accusations and resentment, William had kept hope and love alive, which eventually made reconciliation possible. "Dad," she said before retreating to her own room, "thank you for never giving up on us." "A family is worth any sacrifice," replied William. "Good night, my daughter." Tyler and Ryan decided to sleep in the living room, using pillows and blankets William had stored. They wanted to stay as close as possible to the reunited family, unconsciously fearing that morning might bring back the separation and conflict that had defined their lives for so long. William was the last to withdraw, remaining on the porch for a few minutes to absorb the magnitude of the transformations that had occurred that day. He had woken up alone and melancholy, as on so many other mornings of the last 3 years, but was ending the day surrounded by the love and acceptance he had always desired. The full moon illuminated the West Texas Badlands, creating soft shadows that danced among the cacti and dry trees. The silence of the night was punctuated only by the distant call of owls and the whisper of the wind through the leaves. It was the same scene William had contemplated on hundreds of lonely nights, but now it had a completely different meaning. "Thank you," he whispered to the stars, addressing both the memory of the ancestors who had built that property and the invisible forces that had made the family reconciliation possible. The next morning, Emily was the first to wake up, eager to confirm that the events of the previous day had really happened. The aroma of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen and the sound of familiar voices talking calmly confirmed that she had not dreamed of the family reunion. William was preparing a special breakfast with ingredients he had grown or produced on the ranch itself. Eggs from chickens he kept in the backyard, milk from a goat he kept in a makeshift pen, fruit from trees he had planted, and bread he had learned to make in the wood stove. "Good morning, my little granddaughter," he said with a radiant smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in 3 years," replied Emily, hugging her grandfather. "I dreamed we were planting an entire forest around the house." "Who knows? Maybe we'll make that dream come true," said William. "With proper irrigation, we can plant many trees that will grow and provide shade for future generations." Margaret came down the stairs with a more rested and hopeful expression than she had shown in months. For the first time since Brandon's disappearance, she had slept deeply, without nightmares or worries keeping her awake in the early hours. "Dad, I feel as if I've woken from a nightmare that lasted 3 years," she said. "Sometimes we need to go through dark nights to better appreciate the light of dawn," William replied philosophically. Tyler and Ryan woke up refreshed and eager to start working on the property. During the night, they had talked quietly about projects they could implement to modernize the ranch without losing its traditional character. They had ideas about solar energy, efficient irrigation systems, and even creating a website to sell organic products directly to urban consumers. "Grandpa, can we start planning improvements for the ranch today?" asked Tyler excitedly. "Of course," replied William. "But first let's finish breakfast, and then I insist on showing you every corner of this property." The tour of the ranch revealed the immense potential the property still held, despite years of partial neglect. There were ponds that could be cleaned and restocked with fish, pastures that could be restored for cattle raising, and extensive areas of fertile land that awaited only investment and work to become productive again. William showed the family the projects he had developed during his 3 years of isolation. Detailed maps of the property, irrigation plans, lists of crops that would adapt well to the region's climate, and even architectural sketches for additional buildings that might be needed as the ranch grew. "You planned all this by yourself?" asked Margaret, impressed with the level of detail in the projects. "I had a lot of time to think," William replied modestly, "and I always held on to the hope that one day you would return to help me realize these dreams." William's unshakable faith in the power of family reunion had sustained not only his sanity during the isolation, but also his ability to keep planning and dreaming of a better future. Every sketch, every calculation, every project had been developed with the belief that it would eventually serve to benefit the people he loved. Emily ran through the fields imagining what they would be like when they were cultivated and full of life again. She could visualize lush crops swaying in the wind, animals grazing peacefully, and the big house serving as the heart of a prosperous and happy community. "Grandpa, how long will it take to transform all of this?" she asked. "Years," William answered honestly. "But with each passing season we will see improvements, and the most important thing is that we'll do it together as a family." The prospect of a long-term project that would unite the family around common goals excited everyone present. They had discovered they had not only the potential to rebuild the ranch, but also the opportunity to create memories and traditions that would be passed down to future generations. Margaret made the final decision to sell her house in the city and invest completely in rural life. She called a real estate agency and scheduled an appraisal of her urban property, determined to burn all the bridges that connected her to the life she had built with Brandon. "Dad, I want to invest everything I have in this project," she announced. "Our family deserves to have back the prosperity that Brandon tried to steal." "Are you sure, my daughter?" asked William. "Life in the country isn't easy, especially for someone used to the comforts of the city." "I am absolutely sure," Margaret replied with determination. "Brandon taught me that what truly matters can be lost in a matter of seconds. I don't want to risk losing my family over material things anymore." Tyler and Ryan also made important decisions about their futures. Tyler decided to finish his correspondence course in agricultural engineering, specializing in techniques that could be applied on the family ranch. Ryan chose to study rural administration and digital marketing, focusing on how to turn agricultural products into sustainable and profitable businesses. "We want our family to be an example of how it's possible to prosper in the country using modern knowledge and traditional values," explained Tyler. "And we want to honor the memory of our ancestors, showing that their dreams didn't die," added Ryan. Emily decided she wanted to study veterinary medicine to help not only with the animals on their own ranch, but also to serve the rural community of the region. She had realized her calling was connected to the land and the animals, and she wanted to develop skills that would be useful for the entire area where they lived. "Grandpa, can you teach me about how to care for animals until I graduate?" she asked. "It will be my pleasure," William replied. "Your great-grandfather was known throughout the region as the best cattle handler in the Badlands. I will teach you everything I learned from him." The connection to family traditions gave each family member a renewed sense of purpose and identity. They weren't just rebuilding a ranch, they were restoring a legacy that had been interrupted by circumstances, but that could now flourish again with renewed vigor. William showed everyone the family cemetery he had cared for during the years of isolation, where several generations of ancestors who had lived and worked on the same land were buried. The well-kept headstones and fresh flowers showed he had kept the memory of those who came before alive, honoring their contribution to the family's history. "They built all this for us," said William, moved. "Now it's our responsibility to build something for the generations that will come after us." The visit to the cemetery touched every member of the family deeply, creating a spiritual connection with their roots that had been lost during the years of urban life and family conflicts. They realized they were part of something much larger than their own individual lives, an unbroken chain of love, work, and hope that stretched across time. Margaret cried as she read the names engraved on the stones, recognizing stories William had told during her childhood, but which she had forgotten during the years of estrangement. Each grave represented a life dedicated to family and the land, an example of dedication and perseverance that she now wanted to emulate. "Dad, I ask for forgiveness for them too," she said, pointing to the headstones, "for letting our family fall apart and almost lose everything they built." "They would understand," replied William. "We all make mistakes in life. What matters is that we learned from those mistakes and became better people." William's wisdom, tempered by years of suffering and reflection, offered perspective and comfort to a family that was learning to deal with guilt, regret, and the need for forgiveness. He had transformed his pain into understanding and his loneliness into an appreciation for the importance of family relationships. Emily planted a flower on her great-grandmother Hope's grave, silently promising to honor the memory of the strong, hard-working woman whose eyes sparkled like her own. The connection between generations grew stronger through simple gestures that demonstrated continuity and respect for the family heritage. Tyler and Ryan offered their services to improve the cemetery, building a low wall around it and planting trees that would provide shade and beauty to the place where their ancestors rested. They wanted the space to reflect the pride and love they felt for their family heritage. Back at the house, the family spent the rest of the day planning in detail how they would implement their ideas for the ranch. William shared decades of knowledge about farming, cattle ranching, and rural life, while the younger members contributed information about modern technologies and market trends. "Grandpa, what if we created a school visitation program?" suggested Emily. "City kids could come here to learn about farming and country life." "Excellent idea," said William. "Education is always an investment that returns multiplied." "We could also offer workshops on organic food production," added Margaret. "A lot of people want to learn how to eat healthier." The ideas flowed naturally as each person contributed their unique skills and perspectives. The diversity of ages and experiences within the family created a synergy that multiplied the potential of each individual project. Tyler suggested installing solar panels to make the ranch completely energy self-sufficient, while Ryan researched government programs that offered funding for sustainable agriculture projects. They were determined to use all available resources to maximize their chances of success. "The ranch will be a model of sustainability and family prosperity," Margaret declared with pride, "and a place where love and work come together to create something beautiful," added William. As the day progressed, it became clear that the family had found not only reconciliation, but also a shared purpose that would unite their efforts and dreams for the coming decades. The house in the West Texas Badlands had transformed from a lonely refuge into a planning center for a prosperous and meaningful future. Emily documented everything in a notebook she received from her grandfather, creating detailed records of the plans and promises they were making to each other. She wanted to have a permanent record of that transformative day when her family finally reunited and decided to build something lasting together. "This will be our memory book," she said, showing the notes to everyone. "That way, when we're old, we can look back and remember how it all began. And when our children and grandchildren ask about the family history," added Tyler, "we can show them exactly how we decided to start over." The idea of continuity through generations permeated all the family's conversations and decisions. They weren't just solving present problems, but creating a legacy that would benefit people who hadn't even been born yet. This long-term perspective gave weight and meaning to every choice they made. William watched the gathered family with gratitude and admiration, realizing that his patience and faith during the difficult years had finally been rewarded. He had kept the flame of family hope alive, and now he saw that flame turn into a bright fire that would light the way for future generations. "You know," he said to the gathered family, "during the 3 years I spent alone, I sometimes wondered if it was worth keeping this house and continuing to dream of our reunion. Now I know every day of suffering was worth it to reach this moment." "Grandpa, you're our hero," said Emily, hugging him tightly. "No, my dear granddaughter," replied William. "We are heroes to each other. A strong family is one where each person looks after the others and everyone works together for common goals." The lesson about interdependence and mutual support resonated deeply with everyone present. They had learned in the hardest way possible that a fragmented family is vulnerable to manipulation and abuse, but that a united family is capable of overcoming any challenge and building any dream. Margaret realized she needed to make an important call before the day ended. She phoned the sheriff of the nearest town to officially report Brandon's crimes and hand over all the evidence William had collected. It was time to ensure justice was served and that other families wouldn't suffer at the hands of the same criminal. "Doctor, my father-in-law has documents proving my husband committed several frauds against our family," she said on the phone. "We want to hand everything over to the authorities." The call resulted in an appointment for the next day, when an investigator would come to the ranch to collect all the evidence and formalize the charges against Brandon. William had meticulously organized every document, creating a solid case that would be hard to contest in court. "Dad, are you sure you want to go through the entire legal process?" asked Margaret. "It will be draining and could take years." "I'm sure," William replied with determination. "Brandon needs to face the consequences of his actions, not just for our family, but for all the other people he might try to deceive in the future." The decision to seek justice through the proper legal channels demonstrated that the family had learned to handle conflicts in a mature and responsible way. Instead of seeking revenge or trying to resolve everything internally, they chose to trust the institutions and work within the system to ensure the truth prevailed. Emily felt proud to see her family making ethical and courageous decisions, even when those decisions might be more difficult or time-consuming. She was learning valuable lessons about integrity, perseverance, and the importance of standing up for the right principles even when it requires personal sacrifice. "Grandpa, I want to be there when you speak with the sheriff," she said. "Of course, my little granddaughter," replied William. "It's important for you to see how justice works and understand that we can always seek help when we are victims of crimes." Night fell once again at the ranch, but this time the family was even more united and determined than the night before. They had spent the entire day planning the future and making important decisions that would shape their lives for years to come. Dinner was again a celebration of the family reunion, but now with an added sense of purpose and direction. Each person knew exactly what their role would be in rebuilding the ranch and restoring the family's prosperity. "Dad, I have a confession to make," said Margaret during the meal. Everyone stopped eating and looked at her with curiosity mixed with apprehension. Margaret took a deep breath before continuing. "All these years, even when I was most furious with you, a part of me always knew there was something wrong with Brandon's story. I ignored my instincts because I wanted to believe him, but deep in my heart I always felt you were being wronged." The confession was courageous and painful, but also liberating. Margaret was finally being completely honest about her feelings and doubts, creating a space for the family to process all the emotional complexities of the situation. "Mom, why didn't you say anything back then?" asked Tyler. "Because I was afraid," admitted Margaret. "Afraid to discover I had married a liar, afraid of losing financial stability, afraid to admit I had made a terrible mistake against my father-in-law." "Fear makes us make bad decisions sometimes," said William understandingly. "What matters is that now you've had the courage to face the truth and make the right decisions." The conversation about fear, courage, and the difficulty of admitting mistakes created a moment of intimacy and vulnerability that strengthened the family bonds even more. Each person shared their own internal struggles and regrets, creating an environment of acceptance and mutual support. Emily confessed that during the 3 years of separation, she sometimes felt anger at her grandfather for having done something that destroyed the family, even though she didn't fully believe the official version of events. Tyler and Ryan admitted they questioned the story told by Brandon, but didn't want to confront their mother when she was emotionally fragile. "We all make mistakes and have had conflicting feelings," concluded William. "What makes us a strong family isn't perfection, but the ability to forgive each other and grow together through difficulties." The night ended with each family member feeling closer and more connected to the others than they had felt in years. They had created a solid foundation of honesty, forgiveness, and unconditional love that would serve as the foundation for everything they would build together in the future. Emily went to sleep, dreaming of the coming years at the ranch, imagining what it would be like to grow up in an environment where she felt completely loved and accepted. She had found not only the grandfather she was looking for, but also a more mature and united version of her family that she didn't even know was possible. Margaret spent a few minutes on the porch before retiring, watching the stars and reflecting on the dramatic transformations that had occurred in her life in just 2 days. She had lost a husband and an urban life, but had gained back a family and a purpose that were worth far more than anything Brandon could have offered. William was the last to go to sleep, as always, but this time his nighttime contemplation was filled with gratitude instead of melancholy. He had spent over 1,000 nights alone on that porch, but he knew he would never face loneliness the same way again. His family had returned home, and this time it was for good. The next morning, the investigator arrived promptly to collect the evidence against Brandon. William had organized all the documents professionally, creating a complete dossier that impressed the officer with its meticulousness and clarity. "Mr. William, you've done exceptional investigative work," said the sheriff. "With this evidence, we have a very strong case against your son-in-law." "I had 3 years to organize everything," William replied modestly, "and the motivation of protecting my family." The process of handing over the evidence was formal, but emotionally significant for the whole family. They were officially placing Brandon in the hands of the law and closing a painful chapter of their lives so they could focus completely on the future they were building together. Emily watched attentively as the sheriff examined each document, asking detailed questions and taking careful notes. It was a practical lesson in how institutions function and how citizens can seek protection against crime and injustice. "Sheriff, how long might it take to arrest Brandon?" asked Margaret. "That depends on where he is," replied the investigator. "But with this evidence, we'll issue an arrest warrant immediately. If he tries to use any of the forged documents or access bank accounts in the United States, he'll be arrested automatically." The prospect that Brandon would face real consequences for his crimes brought a sense of justice and closure that the family needed to move forward completely. They weren't seeking revenge, but rather ensuring the truth was acknowledged and that other people were protected. Tyler took advantage of the sheriff's presence to ask about rural security programs and how to protect the ranch against possible retaliation from Brandon or his associates. The investigator reassured them, explaining that Brandon was more likely an opportunistic criminal than someone with dangerous connections. "Men like your son-in-law usually work alone and use charm instead of violence," explained the sheriff. "When they're discovered, they typically flee rather than confront their victims." After the authorities left, the family felt free to focus completely on their positive plans for the ranch. They had fulfilled their civic duties and could now direct all their energy toward building rather than dealing with the wreckage of the past. Margaret received a call from the real estate agency confirming an excellent offer for her house in the city. The market was hot, and she would get a sum that would allow them to invest significantly in the ranch's infrastructure without compromising the family's financial security. "Dad, with the money from the house sale, we can implement at least half of the projects we planned," she announced excitedly. "And with what we'll recover from the properties Brandon stole, we can do even more," William added. The positive financial outlook allowed the family to dream even bigger about their future accomplishments. They could not only rebuild the ranch, but create something truly special that would serve as a model for other rural families in the region. Emily suggested they document the entire reconstruction process through photos and videos, creating a historical record that could inspire other people facing similar challenges. The idea excited everyone, who realized the potential of their story to touch and motivate other families. "We can show that it's possible to overcome betrayals, rebuild relationships, and create prosperity through honest work and family unity," she said with wisdom surprising for her age. "Our story can give hope to people who think they've lost everything," agreed Tyler. The inspirational dimension of their experience added an additional layer of purpose to the ranch project. They weren't just rebuilding their own lives, but potentially offering an example of resilience and renewal that could benefit many others. Ryan began researching how to create quality digital content, thinking of ways to share William's wisdom about sustainable farming and rural life through online platforms. He envisioned the possibility of the ranch becoming a center for education and inspiration that would reach people across the country. "Grandpa, you have so much valuable knowledge," he said. "It would be selfish of us to keep it all just for our family." "Knowledge only has value when it's shared," replied William. "Your great-grandparents always helped the neighbors with farming techniques. We can continue that tradition using modern tools." The convergence between tradition and innovation was becoming a central theme in all the family's plans. They wanted to honor the wisdom of their ancestors while embracing the possibilities offered by modern technology and contemporary social changes. Margaret began studying rural tourism and organic farming, discovering a growing market of city people interested in authentic countryside experiences. She imagined the ranch offering weekend retreats where city families could learn about rural life, sustainable farming, and the importance of traditional family values. "Dad, we can transform our family reunion experience into something that helps other families reconnect," she suggested. "A ranch that heals families," said Emily poetically, "just like it healed ours." The idea that the property could serve as a place of healing and renewal for others resonated deeply with every family member. They had personally experienced the transformative power of the place and wanted to share that possibility with others facing similar difficulties. William showed the family a letter he had received the previous week from a neighboring family that was facing similar problems with divorce and inheritance disputes. The coincidence seemed to suggest there was a real need in the region for the kind of support and guidance they could offer. "Perhaps this is our calling," he said philosophically, "to use our experience of suffering and reconciliation to help other people find their own paths back to family unity." The prospect of serving a purpose greater than themselves elevated the ranch project from a family enterprise to a social mission. Each family member felt a renewal of energy and enthusiasm upon realizing their work could have a positive impact on the lives of many others. Emily imagined the ranch full of families learning to communicate better, resolve conflicts constructively, and rediscover the love that can exist between different generations. She wanted to be an active part of this healing ministry, using her own experience of reuniting with her grandfather to help other children and teenagers facing family problems. "Grandpa, I want to learn everything about helping families reconcile," she said with determination. "Then you'll have to study psychology as well as veterinary medicine," replied William with a smile, "or find ways to use your love for animals to heal human hearts." The suggestion of combining different areas of knowledge to better serve people intrigued Emily. She began researching animal-assisted therapy and discovered an emerging field where ranches were used to help people with trauma, depression, and relationship problems. Tyler and Ryan were excited about the possibility of creating a multifaceted operation that combined productive farming, education, rural tourism, and therapeutic services. They envisioned a property that would be financially sustainable through multiple income streams, all aligned with positive family and social values. "We can create jobs for people in the region, offer valuable services for families in need, and still maintain a productive ranch that honors our agricultural tradition," summarized Tyler, "and show that it's possible to prosper in the countryside without exploiting people or degrading the environment," added Ryan. The holistic vision that was emerging surpassed anything any family member had imagined individually. The synergy between their different skills, experiences, and passions was creating possibilities that none of them could have conceived alone. William observed the family's growing enthusiasm with admiration and gratitude. During the years of isolation, he had dreamed of reconciliation, but he had never imagined it would result in such an ambitious and meaningful project. The pain they had all faced was transforming into fuel for something truly extraordinary. "You know," he said emotionally, "perhaps Brandon gave us an unintentional gift. If we hadn't gone through all that hardship, maybe we would never have discovered our capacity to create something so special together." "That's true, Grandpa," agreed Emily. "Sometimes God uses bad things to lead us to places even better than where we were before." The spiritual perspective Emily brought to the conversation resonated with everyone present, regardless of their specific religious beliefs. There was something deeply comforting in the idea that their suffering had served a greater purpose, and that their negative experiences could be transformed into strength to help other people. Margaret realized that her own experience of being betrayed and deceived by Brandon especially qualified her to help other women going through similar situations. She could offer a unique perspective on how to recognize signs of manipulation and how to rebuild life after discovering a relationship was based on lies. "Dad, I want to create a specific program for women who have been deceived by husbands or partners," she said. "Teach about financial independence, self-esteem, and how to protect the family from predators like Brandon." "Excellent idea," replied William. "Your experience could save other families from going through what we went through." The idea of turning personal trauma into a tool to help others gave Margaret a renewed sense of purpose and self-esteem. Instead of seeing herself only as a victim of circumstances, she began to see herself as a survivor with valuable knowledge that could benefit other women. Tyler suggested they contact local universities to create partnerships, allowing students in agriculture, psychology, social work, and other relevant fields to intern at the ranch. This would bring youthful energy and updated academic knowledge to complement the family's practical experience and traditional wisdom. "We can create an exchange program between traditional knowledge and modern research," he explained. "The students learn from us about rural life and family values, and we learn from them about new techniques and theories. And the families who come seeking help will benefit from the combination of traditional wisdom with modern scientific knowledge," added Ryan. The idea of building bridges between different generations and types of knowledge aligned perfectly with the family's values and their experience of overcoming misunderstandings through communication and mutual understanding. Emily suggested they create a special program for grandparents and grandchildren, recognizing that the relationship between distant generations often faces unique challenges in contemporary society. She wanted to use her own experience of reconciliation with William to help other families build bridges between different generations. Many grandparents feel isolated from their grandchildren because of changes in society, technology, and lifestyles, she observed insightfully. And many grandchildren miss the opportunity to learn from the wisdom of their elders. "You're right, my granddaughter," said William with pride. "The connection between generations is one of the most precious things a family can have, but also one of the easiest to lose." The program for grandparents and grandchildren became one of the most exciting ideas of the project, combining hands-on activities at the ranch with workshops on intergenerational communication, technology, and preserving family stories. Margaret imagined sessions where grandparents taught traditional skills like cooking, gardening, and crafts, while grandchildren shared knowledge about modern technology and contemporary trends. The ranch would provide a neutral environment where both generations could connect through meaningful activities. "We can create a space where tradition and innovation meet harmoniously," she said enthusiastically. As the plans developed, it became clear that the family had found not only reconciliation, but a life mission that would unite their energies and talents for the coming decades. Each member had a specific but complementary role in realizing the collective vision. William would be the guardian of traditional wisdom and agricultural experience, offering practical knowledge about rural life and family values that had been tested through generations. Margaret would be the leader of programs for women and families, using her personal experience to help others overcome betrayals and rebuild their lives. Tyler would focus on technical infrastructure and environmental sustainability, ensuring all ranch operations were ecologically responsible and economically viable. Ryan would take charge of marketing, digital communication, and business development, creating systems to reach and serve as many people as possible. Emily would be the bridge between generations, using her youth and energy to connect with children and teenagers while learning from William to preserve and pass on traditional knowledge. She would also specialize in animal-assisted therapy, combining her love for animals with her desire to help people. "Each of us has something unique to contribute," observed William. "Together we can create something far greater than any of us could accomplish alone. And we can honor our family by showing that love, hard work, and unity can overcome any adversity," added Margaret. The sense of shared purpose energized all family members in a way none of them had experienced before. They weren't just rebuilding a ranch, They were creating a legacy that could positively impact hundreds or even thousands of lives in the coming decades. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, the first family to seek help arrived just 2 weeks after the reconciliation. They were distant neighbors who had heard about William's gathering with his family and were facing similar problems with inheritance disputes and generational misunderstandings. Mrs. Helen, a 68-year-old woman, had fallen out with her adult children over selling the family's rural property. The children wanted to sell everything to split the money, while she wished to preserve the land that had been worked by the family for 3 generations. "Mr. William," she said with tears in her eyes, "I heard you managed to bring your family together after years apart. Is there hope for mine too?" The first informal consultation happened on the house's porch, with William's entire family participating in the conversation. They discovered they had a natural aptitude for listening, understanding different perspectives, and suggesting solutions that honored both the practical needs and the emotional values of each person involved. Margaret immediately identified with Mrs. Helen, recognizing the feelings of being misunderstood by one's own children and having one's values questioned. William offered the perspective of a patriarch who had faced family rejection but maintained his dignity and love for his relatives. "What do you most want your children to understand?" asked Emily sincerely. "That this land isn't just money," replied Mrs. Helen. "It's our history, our identity, the place where my parents and my husband are buried. It's who we are." The answer deeply moved everyone present, who had gone through the similar experience of nearly losing their own land and family history. They viscerally understood the pain of seeing tangible values being prioritized above emotional and spiritual legacy. Tyler suggested that Mrs. Helen's children come visit the ranch to see an example of how rural property could be both economically productive and emotionally meaningful. Ryan offered help to develop a business plan that showed how the land could generate income without being sold. "Sometimes people just need to see that there are more options than they imagined," said William wisely. The family's first intervention was a success. Mrs. Helen's children were impressed by William and his family's ambitious plans and began considering similar possibilities for their own property. Instead of selling the land, they decided to develop a sustainable agriculture project that would honor their father's memory while providing income for everyone. "You saved our family," said Mrs. Helen's eldest son during a follow-up meeting. "You helped us see that we could honor our father and be practical at the same time." The success of the first intervention confirmed for William's family that they truly had something valuable to offer others. Their own experience of suffering and reconciliation had created a unique combination of empathy, practical wisdom, and hope that could benefit many other families. Margaret began formally studying family mediation techniques and conflict resolution, wanting to complement her personal experience with theoretical knowledge about family dynamics and effective communication. She discovered she had a natural talent for helping people find common ground and build creative solutions for seemingly impossible problems. Tyler and Ryan developed a system to document each case and track the family's progress over time. They wanted to ensure the help offered was truly effective and lasting, not just a temporary solution for deeper conflicts. Emily created a special program for children and teenagers whose families were facing conflicts, offering activities with ranch animals and conversations about how young people could contribute positively to resolving family problems. "Children often see solutions that adults cannot see," she observed, "and they have an honest way of communicating that can help adults understand each other better." The holistic approach that included all generations proved especially effective, creating opportunities for entire families to process conflicts and find paths to reconciliation. William became a father figure for several families in the region, offering the wisdom of someone who had faced betrayal, rejection, and isolation, yet managed to maintain his dignity and eventually regain his family's love. His personal story served as living proof that seemingly impossible situations could be transformed through patience, unconditional love, and persistent work. "Mr. William," said a father during a session, "how did you manage not to become bitter after all you went through?" "By choosing to focus on what I wanted to build rather than what I had lost," replied William. "Bitterness is like poison we drink, hoping someone else will suffer. I decided my family deserved the best version of me, not the version destroyed by circumstances." William's words became mottos that many families took home and applied to their own situations. His ability to transform pain into wisdom and trauma into strength inspired people who had lost hope that their own family problems could be resolved. Margaret developed specific workshops for women who had discovered betrayals in their relationships, offering practical strategies to rebuild self-esteem, financial independence, and trust in their own judgment. She taught other women to recognize signs of manipulation and to protect their families from emotional and financial predators. "I learned the hard way that trust does not mean being naive," she explained during the workshops. "We can love deeply and still keep our eyes open to suspicious behavior." Her sessions always included practical components about financial planning, legal protection, and developing support networks that would allow women to maintain their independence even within compromised relationships. Tyler implemented sustainability programs that served both as a practical model for other rural properties and as a therapeutic activity for families in the healing process. Working together on organic gardening projects, solar panel installation, and water conservation created natural opportunities for communication and collaboration. "When we work side by side creating something positive, we naturally start communicating better," he observed. Shared physical work breaks down emotional barriers in a way that simple conversations sometimes cannot. Ryan created an online platform where families could access educational resources, schedule appointments, and connect with other families facing similar challenges. The virtual community complemented the in-person services offered at the ranch, extending the reach of the available help. "Not all families can come here physically," he explained, "but all can benefit from the lessons we've learned and the resources we've developed." The platform included videos of William sharing wisdom about rural life and family values, recordings of Margaret's workshops on healthy relationships, and documentaries about sustainability projects implemented at the ranch. Emily became an expert at using ranch animals as facilitators for family communication. She discovered that caring for animals together created natural opportunities for families to practice cooperation, patience, and shared responsibility. "Animals don't judge anyone," she would explain to families in conflict. "They respond only to genuine love and care. When we work together to care for them, we rediscover our ability to care for one another." Her programs ranged from feeding chickens and goats to training horses and tending gardens where plants grew to feed the animals. Each activity was carefully structured to promote teamwork and positive communication. After 6 months of informal operation, the ranch had helped more than 20 families resolve significant conflicts and rebuild damaged relationships. The success stories ranged from reconciliations between parents and children to couples who managed to overcome betrayals and divorces that avoided destructive disputes over custody or property. "We are not professional therapists," clarified William during an interview for a local newspaper, "but we are a family that went through similar hardships and found a way back to love and unity. Sometimes that's exactly what other families need to see." The authenticity of the family's experience was precisely what made it so effective. They didn't offer theoretical or idealized solutions, but strategies tested in the fire of real pain and developed through trial and error in their own lives. Margaret was invited to speak in schools about the dangers of abusive relationships and how to recognize signs of manipulation. Her personal story resonated especially with young women who were beginning to explore romantic relationships. "Brandon didn't start out being cruel," she would explain to teenage audiences. "He was charming, attentive, and made me feel special. Emotional predators are experts at figuring out what we need and giving us exactly that until they have our complete trust." Tyler developed partnerships with universities to create research programs on sustainable agriculture and resilient rural communities. The ranch became a living laboratory where students could observe the practical implementation of theories on sustainability, community development, and family rebuilding. Our story proves it's possible to thrive in the countryside using ecological principles and traditional family values, he said during an academic presentation, and it shows that strong families are the foundation for sustainable communities and economies. Ryan expanded the ranch's digital presence through partnerships with influencers and organizations focused on family values and sustainability. The family's story began to reach people across the country, inspiring other rural families to see possibilities where they once saw only difficulties. "Our message is simple," he explained in interviews. "Love, honest work, and family unity can overcome any adversity and create lasting prosperity." Emily began giving talks in schools about the importance of intergenerational relationships and how young people can learn from the wisdom of their elders. Her own story of reconciliation with her grandfather deeply touched other young people who had lost connections with grandparents or felt disconnected from their family roots. "My grandfather taught me that every generation has something valuable to offer the others," she would say to student audiences. "The elders have wisdom and experience. We have energy and new perspectives. When we come together, we create something much stronger than any generation could create alone." The ranch became a regionally recognized model of how to combine tradition and innovation to create economic, environmental, and social sustainability. Delegations from other rural properties, government organizations, and academic institutions made regular visits to study the methods and philosophies implemented by the family. Brandon was never captured, but his fraudulent activities were widely exposed, protecting other potential families from becoming his victims. The properties he had illegally stolen were returned to William's family, providing additional resources to expand the family assistance programs. "Sometimes justice isn't prison or punishment," William reflected. "Sometimes it's preventing more people from suffering and turning our pain into strength to help others." Margaret never married again, discovering she had found satisfaction and purpose in an independent life and in the work of helping other families. She developed a national network of women who had overcome abusive relationships and now helped others in similar situations. "Brandon took a lot from me," she said during a television interview, "but he inadvertently gave me something too, the discovery of my own strength and ability to help others. Perhaps that was my true calling all along." Tyler married an agronomist who shared his passion for sustainability and rural development. Together, they expanded the ranch's environmental projects and started a family that would grow up connected to the land and the values that had been restored through family reconciliation. Ryan found a partner through the digital platform he had created, a family therapist who admired the family's work and wanted to contribute her professional expertise. Together, they developed more formalized protocols for the assistance programs offered at the ranch. Emily grew up to become a veterinarian, specializing in animal-assisted therapy, combining her formal education with the practical wisdom she had learned from William. She never moved permanently from the ranch, choosing to establish her clinic on the property and continue the work of helping families through contact with animals and nature. William lived to see great-grandchildren grow up on the ranch he had restored, teaching them the same lessons about work, family, and values that he had learned from his own ancestors. He died peacefully at 87, surrounded by the family he had reunited, and proud of the legacy of love and service they had built together. William's funeral was a celebration of the life and values he had represented. Hundreds of families who had been helped by the ranch's programs attended to pay their respects, each sharing stories about how William had positively impacted their lives. "He taught us that a family can be broken, but never completely destroyed," said Mrs. Helen during the eulogy, "and that true love finds its way back home no matter how long it takes." Margaret took over the leadership of the family programs after her father's death, expanding them to include services in several cities across the region. She never forgot the lessons she had learned about forgiveness, second chances, and the importance of choosing love over bitterness, even in the face of the deepest betrayal. Tyler and Ryan continued developing the ranch's infrastructure and technology, always innovating but never abandoning the fundamental principles of sustainability and family values that William had established. They created a mentorship program where young people interested in sustainable agriculture could come to learn during long-term internships. Emily expanded her clinic to include residential programs where families in crisis could spend weeks at the ranch working intensively on their relationships while caring for animals and participating in rural activities. Her methods became a model for family therapists across the country. The house where it all began was preserved exactly as it was on the day of the reconciliation, serving as a museum and symbol of the transformation a family can experience when it chooses love over division. Visitors from all over the United States came to see the place where a 13-year-old girl had walked through the West Texas Badlands to find her grandfather and ended up discovering much more than she had sought. Emily didn't just find her grandfather that day, a guide would explain during property tours. She found her family, her history, and her purpose in life. And in doing so, she helped all of us discover ours too. The ranch became a national symbol of family resilience and sustainable rural development, receiving awards and recognition from governmental and international organizations. More importantly, it continued to serve its original function of reuniting families and healing broken relationships. Decades after the day Emily walked alone through the Badlands, the property housed a thriving, multi-generational community that worked together to keep alive the values and dreams that William had preserved during his years of isolation. The family story had become legend, but its message remained simple and powerful. True love always finds a way back home. The generations who grew up on the ranch learned from an early age that family conflicts are opportunities for growth, that forgiveness is a choice that frees the forgiver more than the forgiven, and that honest work shared as a family creates bonds stronger than any adversity can break. The last entry in the memory journal that Emily had started on the day of the reconciliation was written by her own daughter many years later. My mother always told me about the day she found great-grandfather William in the house in the Badlands. But today I understood that she didn't just find a lonely man in an abandoned house. She found our entire family, our purpose, and our strength. Because when one person has enough courage to look for love where others see only problems, they can discover treasures that will change not only their life, but the lives of entire generations. This ranch exists because a 13-year-old girl believed her grandfather deserved to be found and loved. And now, through the work we do here, hundreds of other families have discovered that they too deserve to be reunited and healed. Love always finds a way. End of story. And now tell us, what was your favorite part of this story? Do you believe Emily made the right decision in seeking out her grandfather? What would you have done in her place? Leave your opinion in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. If you have any family story to share, we'd love to hear it. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories we bring to you.